The dust hung thick in the air that Saturday afternoon, coating everything in Willow Creek with a fine red film. The town sat like a scab on the edge of the desert, where New Mexico territory bled into Arizona, neither claiming it with any enthusiasm. Wagons creaked down the main street, their wheels grinding against stones worn smooth by years of similar passages. Elena Hawkins pressed herself against the rough wall of Miller's General Store, trying to disappear into the shadows cast by the awning. At 22, she had learned the art of invisibility, shoulders curved inward, eyes downcast, movements careful and deliberate. Her faded calico dress, once blue but now the color of dust and disappointment, hung loose on her thin frame. The market square buzzed with its usual Saturday energy. Ranchers haggled over cattle prices, their voices rising and falling like waves. Women in bonnets clutched baskets, picking through vegetables that had survived the journey from California. Children darted between the stalls, their laughter sharp and bright against the darker sounds of commerce. Elena watched it all through the curtain of her unwashed blonde hair, reading lips and gestures with the skill of someone who had pretended deafness for so long it had become second nature. She saw Mrs. Patterson arguing with the butcher about the quality of his beef. She noticed young Tom Rodriguez sweet-talking the baker's daughter. She observed everything and said nothing, as always. The familiar stench of whiskey and sweat announced her stepfather before she saw him. Cole Bennett stumbled through the crowd, his movements loose and aggressive. At 45, he wore his failures like a second skin in the permanent flush of his cheeks, the yellow of his eyes, the tremor in his hands when the bottle ran dry. "There you are, girl!" His voice boomed across the square, causing several heads to turn. Elena's stomach clenched, but she kept her face blank, her eyes unfocused. The mask of incomprehension she'd worn for 7 years settled over her features. Cole's hand clamped down on her arm, fingers digging into flesh already mottled with old bruises. He yanked her forward, and Elena stumbled, letting her body go limp and confused like a rag doll. It was safer that way. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cole's voice took on the theatrical quality of a snake oil salesman, "I got myself a proposition here." The crowd's attention shifted, some with curiosity, others with the wary look of people who recognized trouble brewing. Elena caught glimpses of familiar faces, Mr. Chen from the laundry, the widow Martinez, Sheriff Watson's deputy Jim Crawford. None met her eyes. "This here's my daughter," Cole continued, swaying slightly. "Can't hear, can't speak, but she can work. Lord knows she can work." He laughed, a harsh sound that scraped against Elena's nerves. "And I find myself in need of funds for, medical purposes." Someone in the crowd snorted. Everyone knew Cole's only medicine came in a bottle. "So I'm offering her services to the highest bidder, good strong back, knows how to cook and clean, won't talk back neither." He laughed again at his own joke. $100 takes her for, let's say, a year. Hell, make it permanent if you want. I'm a reasonable man. The silence that followed was thick as molasses. Elena kept her gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the crowd, but she felt the weight of their stares, some pitying, some disgusted, most simply uncomfortable. This was Willow Creek. People minded their own business and expected others to do the same. "Cole, you're drunk." Jim Crawford's voice cut through the silence. "Go home and sleep it off. Ain't nothing illegal about it." Cole shot back. "Man's got a right to manage his own household. She's of age, ain't married, and I'm her legal guardian." It was true, and everyone knew it. The law in the territories was thin as paper and twice as easy to tear. A father's rights over an unmarried daughter were near absolute, and stepfathers claimed the same privileges when it suited them. Elena felt her cheeks burn, but she maintained her vacant expression. 7 years of practice had taught her that reaction only brought pain. Better to be furniture than a person. Furniture didn't feel, furniture didn't hurt. $50, someone called out. Elena's heart sank. She recognized the voice Luther Hayes, who ran the brothel on the edge of town. His establishment might technically be a boarding house, but everyone knew what kind of board he offered. 50, Cole scoffed. She's worth twice that strong as an ox. This one. And clean, no diseases, no bad habits. Well-trained, too. The implications hung in the air like smoke. Elena's fingernails dug into her palms, the sharp pain helping her maintain control. Don't react. Don't show understanding. Be the deaf-mute girl they expect. 75. Another voice. This one belonging to Karl Hoffman, the German who owned the mine. His wife had died last winter, leaving him with a house full of children and laundry. Now we're talking. Cole's grip on Elena's arm tightened. Do I hear 80? The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the spectacle like flies to carrion. Elena recognized the expressions: disgust warring with fascination, righteousness battling with relief that it wasn't their daughter standing there. A few women clutched their shawls tighter and hurried away. Most stayed to watch. This ain't right, someone muttered, but not loud enough to matter, not brave enough to step forward. $80, Luther Hayes again, his calculating gaze making Elena's skin crawl. 85, Hoffman, desperation creeping into his voice. 90. Cole's face lit up with greedy pleasure. $90 from Mr. Hayes, going once. The sound of horse hooves on packed earth made several people turn. A rider approached from the direction of the desert, moving with the easy grace of someone who lived more in the saddle than on foot. As he drew closer, Elena glimpsed dark hair bound back, skin burnished by sun and wind, and clothes that marked him as clearly as any sign Navajo. The crowd's energy shifted, whispers rippling outward. Indians weren't forbidden in town, but they weren't welcome either. This one rode alone, which was either very brave or very foolish. He dismounted in one fluid motion, and Elena noticed the way he moved controlled, aware, like a man who had learned to navigate hostile spaces. He was perhaps 35, with the kind of stillness that could be mistaken for passivity by those who didn't know better. Elena knew better. She had learned to read danger in all its forms. Going twice, and... Cole continued, though his eyes tracked the newcomer warily. The Navajo man Ashki Yazi, though Elena didn't know his name yet, walked through the crowd like it was sagebrush, people parting before him without conscious thought. He stopped at the edge of the makeshift auction circle and studied the scene with dark, unreadable eyes. $100, he said quietly. His English was accented but clear, each word carefully placed. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the horses seemed to stop their stamping. Cole recovered first, greed overcoming surprise. Well now, $100 from... He paused, clearly struggling with whether money from an Indian was still money. You can't sell her to no Indian, someone shouted from the safety of the crowd. Money's money, Cole shot back, though he looked uncertain now. The crowd's mood had shifted from uncomfortable fascination to something uglier. Ashki reached into his vest and withdrew a leather pouch. He counted out bills, real federal notes, not the questionable currency that sometimes floated through the territories. $100 exactly, placed on a barrel with deliberate precision. This is legal, he asked Jim Crawford directly. The deputy shifted uncomfortably. Technically speaking, Cole's her guardian, and she's of age, and there ain't no law says... He trailed off, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Then we are finished. Ashki picked up the money and held it out to Cole. Cole looked at the money, at the crowd, at Elena. For a moment, she thought he might refuse, that pride or prejudice would overcome greed. Then his hand shot out and snatched the bills, counting them quickly. She's yours, he said, stepping back. Can't do nothing anyway. Deaf and dumb as a post. He was already moving toward the saloon, the money burning in his pocket. The crowd began to disperse, voices rising in speculation and judgment. Elena stood frozen, unsure what to do. This wasn't how she'd imagined escape traded from one cage to another, and to a Navajo man whose intentions were completely unknown. Ashki approached slowly, the way one might approach a spooked horse. He stopped just outside arm's reach and studied her for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I have horses that need tending and a house that needs keeping. You will work, and you will have food and shelter and safety. When you wish to leave, you may leave. This is my offer." He turned and walked back to his horse, clearly expecting her to follow, or not, as she chose. Elena hesitated, looking around at the town that had been her prison for so long. She saw faces she'd known for years, people who had watched Cole hurt her and done nothing, who had stood by while she was sold like livestock. The Navajo man, her employer now, she supposed was already mounting his horse. He looked back once, a question in his glance. Elena made her choice. She walked forward, each step taking her further from the only life she'd known. He helped her mount behind him, his touch impersonal but careful. As they rode out of Willow Creek, Elena allowed herself one last look back. The town was already returning to normal, the dust of their departure settling over the scene like a curtain. She faced forward then, toward the unknown desert and whatever lay ahead. The horse's rhythm was steady beneath her, and the man in front of her rode in silence. It wasn't the rescue she dreamed of in the dark nights when Cole's snoring shook the walls, but it was escape. And for now, that was enough. The red rocks rose before them like ancient sentinels, and Elena rode toward them in silence, the same silence that had saved her and damned her in equal measure. But now, for the first time in 7 years, it was a silence of her own choosing. The trail wound through the valley like a snake seeking shade, dust rising in small clouds beneath the horse's hooves. Elena gripped the saddle's cantle, careful not to touch the man in front of her more than necessary. They had ridden for 2 hours in complete silence, leaving Willow Creek far behind until it was just a smudge against the horizon. The landscape transformed around them from the flat, desperate sprawl near town to rolling hills dotted with piñon and juniper. Red rock formations jutted from the earth like the bones of ancient giants, and the air carried the sharp scent of sage. It was beautiful in a harsh way. This country that demanded respect rather than love. Ashki rode as if he were part of the horse, adjusting to every shift in terrain without thought. Elena watched how he guided the animal with subtle pressure from his knees, how his body remained relaxed even when navigating steep descents. Everything about him spoke of competence without showiness, efficiency without hurry. When the sun reached its peak, he stopped near a cluster of cottonwoods that promised water. He dismounted first, then turned to help her down. Elena hesitated before accepting his hand, rough with calluses but surprisingly gentle. Her legs nearly buckled after the long ride, muscles protesting the unfamiliar activity. He led the horse to where a small spring bubbled up from the rocks, clear and cold, while the animal drank. Ashki unpacked a canvas bag from his saddlebags. He laid out dried meat, flatbread, and a leather water pouch on a relatively flat stone, then stepped back and gestured for her to eat first. Elena approached slowly, still playing her role of the deaf-mute girl. She took a small piece of bread, nibbling at it while watching him from the corner of her eye. He settled against a boulder several feet away, giving her space while he ate his own portion. The silence between them was different from the silence she'd known with Cole, not pregnant with threat, but simply empty, waiting to be filled or left alone as they chose. When an owl called from somewhere in the cottonwoods, Elena's head turned automatically toward the sound. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but she caught the slight narrowing of Ashki's eyes. He had noticed. Of course he had. A man who could read the desert's moods would hardly miss such an obvious tell. But he said nothing, just continued eating as if nothing had happened. When they finished, he repacked the remaining food and refilled the water pouch from the spring. He moved with economy, each action deliberate and necessary. No wasted motion, no hurry. They rode on as the afternoon shadows lengthened, following trails that seemed invisible to Elena's eyes but clear as roads to his. The horse picked its way through narrow passages between rocks, across dry washes that would become raging torrents during the monsoons, up slopes that made Elena's stomach lurch. Finally, as the sun touched the western peaks, they crested a rise and she saw their destination. A small homestead nestled in a protected valley, a cabin built of logs and mud. A corral with a dozen horses. A garden plot surrounded by a fence of woven branches. Smoke rose from the chimney, straight as a prayer in the still air. It wasn't what she'd expected, somehow. She'd imagined either squalor or hidden wealth. The extremes that stories taught, this was neither. It was simply a home, well-maintained and practical, showing the care of someone who valued function over appearance. Ashki dismounted and led the horse to the corral. He removed the saddle with practiced movements, checking the animal's back for sores, running his hands down each leg. Only when the horse was watered, fed, and turned out with the others did he turn his attention back to Elena. She had climbed down on her own and stood uncertainly near the cabin's door. He approached and pushed it open, gesturing for her to enter. The interior was dim after the bright afternoon, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. One large room dominated by a stone fireplace, a smaller room bedroom. She assumed opened off the back. The furnishings were sparse, but well made a table and 2 chairs, shelves holding dishes and supplies, hooks for clothes and equipment. Everything had its place, arranged with the same economy of motion she'd observed in him. He moved to the fireplace and stirred the banked coals to life, adding wood with careful attention to the draft. Then he showed her around with gestures rather than words, the water barrel, the food stores, the washing basin. He pointed to the smaller room, then to himself, shaking his head, then to a corner of the main room where blankets were folded on a narrow cot. For her. Elena nodded her understanding, maintaining her silent facade. He studied her for a moment, then moved to the shelves and took down a slate and chalk. He wrote in careful letters, "You work, you eat, you safe, understand." She took the chalk and wrote back, "Yes." He nodded and erased the slate. Then he wrote again, "Horses morning, cook, clean, you do." "Yes." Another nod. He prepared a simple meal, beans and cornbread. With strips of dried venison, they ate at the table, the slate between them. Occasionally he would write something salt when he passed it to her. Tomorrow early, when discussing the morning routine. Elena responded with nods and simple written words, careful not to reveal too much. After dinner, he showed her how to bank the fire for the night, where to find the privy behind the cabin, how to bar the door. His instruction was patient, thorough, assuming nothing about her knowledge. It was the kind of teaching that came from someone used to dealing with horses and other creatures that couldn't speak their needs. When full dark came, he retreated to his room, closing the door with a soft click. Elena sat on her cot, still fully dressed, listening to the night sounds wind in the pines. A coyote's distant call, the horses shifting in the corral, for the first time in years. She didn't hear Cole's drunken breathing or the creak of floorboards that meant danger approaching. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders. It smelled of cedar and smoke, clean scents that spoke of care and order. The cabin was warm, the door was barred, and she was alone, but not abandoned. It was strange. This feeling of safety that came not from locks or weapons, but from the simple fact of distance from Cole, from Willow Creek, from the life that had nearly crushed her. In the darkness, she allowed herself to think about the man who had bought her freedom, even if he didn't know that's what he'd done. The way he'd counted out those bills without hesitation, the way he'd offered her choice when everyone expected him to simply take what he'd paid for, the way he noticed her reaction to the owl but said nothing. He was a mystery, this quiet man who lived alone at the edge of nowhere. But he was a mystery that fed her and sheltered her and kept his distance. And for now, That was miracle enough. The next morning came with pale light through the single window. Elena woke to the sound of movement in the other room, quiet footsteps, the soft clink of metal. She rose quickly, straightening her dress and hair as best she could. When she emerged from behind the curtain that gave her corner some privacy, Ashki was already dressed and tending the fire. He looked up at her arrival and nodded, then gestured to the table where he'd set out breakfast materials. Elena understood this was her job now. She moved to prepare the meal while he went outside to tend the horses. Through the window, she watched him work. He moved among the animals with the same quiet confidence he showed in everything else. The horses responded to him like plants to sunlight, following his movements, accepting his touch. There was no fear in them, no wariness. Whatever else this man was, he was kind to his animals. She had biscuits baking and coffee brewing when he returned. He washed his hands in the basin, dried them on a cloth, and sat at the table. When she served the food, he ate steadily but without the desperate hunger she'd seen in many men. Everything about him spoke of sufficiency, having enough, wanting no more than necessary. After breakfast, he led her outside to show her the full scope of her duties. The garden needed weeding and watering. The cabin needed daily sweeping. Dust was a constant enemy here. Clothes needed washing when there was enough water. Food needed preparing. It was work she knew, work she'd done for years. But here it felt different. Here, it was trade rather than obligation, labor rather than servitude. He showed her how to approach the horses, how to check their water, how to spot signs of illness or injury. His hands shaped the air, demonstrating the proper way to move, where to touch, what to avoid. Elena found herself genuinely interested, forgetting for moments to maintain her vacant expression. The days settled into rhythm. Morning chores, afternoon tasks, evening meals. Ashki would disappear sometimes, riding out to check distant pastures or visit the horses he kept in other valleys. He always returned before dark, always checked on her with a glance and a nod, always maintained that careful distance between employer and employee. Elena began to understand the language of his silences, the slight lift of his eyebrow that asked if she needed anything, the tilt of his head that meant he was pleased with her work, the particular stillness that came over him when he was thinking deeply about something. She found herself relaxing by degrees, the constant tension of years slowly unwinding. She still maintained her pretense, still wrote on the slate when communication was necessary, still kept her eyes downcast and her movements careful. But the fear that had lived in her chest like a caged bird began to quiet. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, him working on a piece of leather, her mending a torn shirt, she forgot herself. He reached for his coffee cup and knocked it over, the hot liquid spilling across the table. Without thinking, Elena jumped up with a gasp, grabbing a cloth to clean the mess. She froze, realizing what she'd done. A gasp was a sound. Deaf people didn't make sounds in response to things they couldn't hear. Ashki sat very still, watching her. Elena's heart hammered as she slowly resumed cleaning, trying to pretend nothing had happened. But when she risked a glance at his face, she saw no anger there, no surprise either, just that same steady observation, as if he were a naturalist studying some interesting phenomenon. He helped her finish cleaning, then returned to his leather work as if nothing had changed, but something had changed. The pretense between them had cracked, even if neither acknowledged it. That night, Elena lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling beams, visible in the moonlight through the window. She thought about the choice he'd offered that first day to stay or leave when she wished. She thought about the careful distance he maintained, the respect in it. She thought about safety and freedom and the difference between silence chosen and silence imposed. Tomorrow, she would maintain her role. Tomorrow, she would write on the slate and move through her duties with downcast eyes. But tonight, in the darkness of this cabin at the edge of the world, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to speak. Not yet, not soon, But someday, perhaps, when trust had grown as deep as the roots of the piñon pines. For now, silence was still her shield. But here, in this place of space and patience, she began to imagine it might someday be something else, a choice rather than a cage, a gift rather than a theft. And that possibility, fragile as spring ice, was the first true hope she'd felt in 7 years. The autumn wind carried the scent of juniper smoke across the valley as Elena learned the rhythms of her new life. 3 weeks had passed since Ashki brought her to his homestead, and she had discovered that survival here required different skills than those she'd honed in Willow Creek. There, she had learned to be invisible. Here, she was learning to be useful. The morning routine began before dawn. Ashki would emerge from his room fully dressed, and Elena would already have the fire stoked and coffee brewing. They had developed an efficient dance around each other. She would set out breakfast materials while he tended the horses. He would haul water while she prepared the meal. All accomplished without words, through gestures and glances and the occasional note on the slate. Today's task was repairing the roof before the winter rains came. Ashki had shown her yesterday how to mix mud with straw, achieving just the right consistency to patch the cracks that had developed over the summer. Elena worked beside him, hauling buckets of the mixture up the ladder while he spread it carefully across the damaged sections. From the roof, she could see the full scope of his land, the valley stretching green and gold, the red rocks standing guard at its borders, the distant mountains already wearing caps of early snow. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest tight, this wild space that asked nothing of her except honest work. As she climbed down to mix another batch, her foot slipped on a loose rung. For a moment she hung suspended, fingers cramping around the ladder's sides, a cry building in her throat. Then strong hands steadied her waist, guiding her safely to the ground. Ashki held her just long enough to ensure her balance, then stepped back to his proper distance. "Careful," he said quietly, the first word he'd spoken directly to her in days. Elena nodded, eyes downcast, playing her role. But she noticed how he checked the ladder thoroughly after that, tightening every rung before allowing her to climb again. Protection offered without fuss or expectation of gratitude. The afternoon brought a different task. One of the horses, a mare named Rose for the marking on her forehead, had developed a slight limp. Ashki led the animal to the barn area, gesturing for Elena to watch as he examined the hoof. He showed her how to feel for heat, how to check for stones or thorns, how to clean the frog with careful strokes of the hoof pick. Elena found herself leaning closer, genuinely fascinated by the careful way he worked. The horse stood patient under his hands, occasionally nuzzling his shoulder as if offering encouragement. When he found the problem, a small stone wedged deep, he removed it with infinite patience, never forcing, letting the horse tell him when she was ready. "Your turn," he said, moving to another hoof. Elena took the pick hesitantly. She had helped with Cole's old mule sometimes, but that animal had been as mean as its owner, likely to bite or kick without warning. Rose merely shifted her weight and continued eating hay, accepting Elena's inexpert touch with equine forbearance. Ashki guided her hands, showing the proper angle, the right amount of pressure. His touch was impersonal as always, teacher to student, nothing more. But Elena found herself aware of the calluses on his palms, the steadiness of his grip, the way he smelled of leather and sage and honest sweat. That evening, after supper, he surprised her by bringing out a wooden box she hadn't seen before. Inside were needles, thread, and fabric good cloth, not the rough homespun she was used to. He gestured to her worn dress, then to the fabric, the meaning clear. She could make herself new clothes. Elena touched the cloth reverently. It was simple but sturdy, a deep blue that would hide stains and wear well. On the slate, she wrote, "Thank you." He shrugged, already turning back to his evening tasks. But she caught the slight softening around his eyes, the almost smile that suggested her gratitude pleased him. As the days shortened and the nights grew cold, Their routine adjusted. More time spent indoors, maintaining equipment and preparing for winter. Ashki taught her to repair harnesses, waterproof boots with bear grease, and identify the different types of wood that burned best for heat versus cooking, all through gestures and demonstrations, with the slate for complex explanations. One night, a pack of wolves came down from the high country, drawn by the scent of horses. Elena woke to their howling, closer than she'd ever heard before. Fear crawled up her spine, not the familiar fear of Cole's temper, but something older, more primal. She lay rigid in her cot, listening to them circle the homestead. A board creaked, and Ashki emerged from his room carrying a rifle. He moved to the window, watching, the weapon ready but not raised. Elena pulled her blanket higher, trying to disappear into her corner. Then she heard one of the horses screaming in panic. Without thinking, she whispered, "Someone's out there!" The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Ashki turned slowly from the window, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, but it was too late. 7 years of silence, broken by worry for a horse. He studied her for a long moment. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned back to the window. "Just wolves," he said calmly. "They won't brave the corral fence, but I'll watch to be sure." Elena remained frozen, her heart hammering. He knew, of course he knew, had probably known from that first day when she'd turned toward the owl's call. But he wasn't angry, wasn't demanding explanations, wasn't grabbing her arm and calling her a liar. He stood guard by the window until dawn drove the wolves back to the mountains. Only then did he set the rifle aside and begin preparing for the day's work. At breakfast, he pushed the slate toward her as usual, but there was a question in his eyes. Elena took the chalk with trembling fingers. "How long you know?" "Beginning," he wrote back. "Why not say?" He considered this, then wrote slowly, "Your choice, your reason, not mine to take." Tears burned her eyes. She blinked them back, unwilling to show that much vulnerability. "What now? You choose, speak or not, stay or go, always your choice." The simple acceptance undid her more than anger would have. She set down the chalk and fled outside, needing air, needing space to think. The morning was crisp, frost glittering on the grass, the sky a blue so deep it hurt to look at. She stood by the corral where the horses milled, safe and calm now that daylight had returned. When she went back inside, Ashki was mending a bridle, giving her the gift of normalcy. She prepared lunch in silence, but it was a different silence now, one that felt less like armor and more like consideration. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Elena made her decision. She cleared her throat, the sound rusty from disuse, and spoke for the first time in 7 years. "My name is Elena." Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper, but the words were clear. Ashki looked up from his leather work, giving her his full attention without the weight of expectation. "Elena," he repeated, pronouncing it carefully. "Good name." I started pretending when I was 15, she continued, the words coming slowly, painfully. "Cole, when he drank, he got meaner if I talked back, if I cried, if I made any sound at all. So I stopped. Became furniture. Furniture doesn't feel pain." Ashki set aside his work, his dark eyes steady on hers. "Smart," he said simply. "You survived." "But I lost myself." The words tumbled out now, a dam breaking. 7 years of being nothing, of watching him hurt me and others watching him hurt me, and nobody ever— "You're here now," Ashki interrupted gently. "Not nothing, not furniture. Elena who tends horses and makes good biscuits and is learning to patch roofs. That's someone." She laughed, actually laughed, though it sounded more like a sob. "I don't even know who that is anymore." "Then you learn," he said, like the horses learn to trust after rough handling. Slow, patient, one day to the next. Why did you buy me? The question she'd wondered since that first day. You could see I wasn't what Cole said. Ashki was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, my sister, he said slowly. Taken during the long walk. Sold too, different way. Never found her. But I thought, if somewhere a man helps her, maybe the world balances. Little bit. The long walk. Elena had heard whispers of it, the forced march of the Navajo people from their lands. The deaths, the camps. She knew better than to ask for details. Some stories were too heavy for casual telling. I'm sorry, she said instead. He shrugged. Past is past. We live now. You choose speak or not speak, stay or go, but here, you are safe to choose. They sat quietly after that, the fire crackling between them. Elena felt raw, exposed, as if speaking had peeled away a protective shell. But underneath was something else, a lightness, a possibility of becoming more than the silent ghost she'd been. Over the following days, she experimented with voice and silence. Sometimes she spoke observations about the horses, questions about the work, small comments about the weather. Other times she remained quiet, but it was a different quiet now, chosen rather than forced. Ashki adjusted seamlessly, responding when she spoke, comfortable when she didn't. She told him pieces of her story as she felt able, about her mother's death when she was 12, about Cole appearing 2 years later. All charm and promises until the ring was on her mother's replacement's finger. About the escalation from harsh words to harsh hands. About the day she decided silence was safer than sound. Ashki listened without judgment, occasionally sharing his own pieces. How he'd learned horses from his grandfather. Why he lived alone so far from his people. The careful way he navigated between two worlds that both claimed and rejected him. They were not conversations. Exactly more like trading stones across a river, building a bridge one careful placement at a time. One afternoon, as Elena was coming in from feeding the chickens, she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. Her body reacted before her mind, heart racing, breath short. The familiar urge to hide, but there was nowhere to hide here except behind silence. And she'd already given that away. Ashki appeared from the barn, rifle in hand but held loosely. He watched the riders approach, tension in his shoulders but not alarm. Neighbors, he said to Elena. The Delgados, good people. The riders resolved into a Mexican family father, mother, and teenage son. They dismounted with the ease of people born to the saddle, the woman calling out a greeting in Spanish that Ashki returned. Elena hung back, unsure of her place in this social equation. Senor Ashki, the man said, switching to English. We come to warn. That man from town, the ugly one who sells his daughter, he makes trouble. Says you stole from him. He talks to E.P.H. Lyle. E.P.H. Lyle. Even in Willow Creek, that name carried weight. Gun for hire, sometimes deputy when the real law was too far away. Always ready to solve problems for whoever paid best. Elena's stomach clenched. Let him come, Ashki said calmly. It's not right, the woman interjected, noticing Elena for the first time. Her expression softened. You are the girl, the one he tried to sell. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Mija, the woman said gently. You are safe here. This man, he is good. And we are close, you need help. You come to us. Yes? Yes? Elena managed. Thank you. They stayed long enough to water their horses and share information. Cole had been drinking heavily, spending the money from Elena's sale and borrowing against future earnings he no longer had. He'd been talking about Indian theft, about white women needing rescue, about justice that the law wouldn't provide, the kind of talk that could gather a mob in a place like Willow Creek. After the Delgados left, Ashki and Elena worked in tense silence. She could see him thinking, planning, the careful consideration of a man who'd learned to survive in hostile territory. As the sun set, he finally spoke. You could go, he said, The Delgados would take you. Santa Fe, maybe, or California. Far from here. Elena considered it. Safety in distance. A new start where no one knew her story. It was sensible. It was smart. It was what the girl who'd lived in silence would have chosen. "No," she said. "I'm tired of running for my own life. This is my home now, too." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "Then we prepare," he said simply. That night, Elena lay in her cot listening to the wind and thinking about choices, about the difference between silence as shield and silence as gift, about the man in the next room who'd offered her freedom when everyone else saw only property, about the self she was slowly discovering in this place of red rock and wide sky. Tomorrow would bring what it brought: Cole and his hired gun. Perhaps violence and ugly words. The test of whether the fragile safety she'd found here could withstand the world's intrusion. But tonight, she had a voice and a name and a choice. And that was more than she'd had in 7 years. "Elena," she whispered into the darkness, just to hear it, just to prove she could. The sound of her own name was like water in the desert, precious, necessary, alive. The spring melt had begun early that year, turning the usually dry creek into a rushing torrent. Elena stood at its edge, watching the water tumble over rocks with a force that reminded her winter's grip was finally loosening. She had come to wash clothes, one of the many tasks that had become routine in the months since she'd found her voice again. The sun felt warm on her shoulders as she knelt by a calmer pool near the bank, working soap into the fabric of Ashki's work shirt. Her own hands had grown strong over the winter, calloused in new places from meaningful labor rather than defensive clenching. The cold water was shocking, but clean. Nothing like the murky wash water she'd used in Willow Creek. She had just reached for another garment when her foot slipped on the wet stone. Time seemed to slow as she felt herself falling, the basket of clothes tumbling, her balance completely lost. The current caught her skirts, pulling her sideways into deeper water. The shock of cold drove all breath from her lungs. Water closed over her head, pressing in from all sides. Her heavy skirts tangled around her legs, the current stronger than she'd expected. Panic flared bright and sharp, not of drowning, exactly, but of losing the life she'd only just begun to build. She fought to surface, managed one gasping breath before the current pulled her under again. Then strong hands caught her waist, lifting her up and out with steady strength. Ashki had her against his chest, water streaming from them both as he carried her to solid ground. She coughed, gasping, clinging to his shoulders without thought for propriety. He held her until her breathing steadied, then carefully set her on a flat boulder in the sun. Her hair had come completely undone, hanging in wet ropes around her shoulders. As Ashki stepped back, strands of it caught on his work-roughened hands. He gently untangled them, his touch careful but somehow intimate in its necessity. Elena shivered, though whether from cold or something else, she couldn't say. "You're all right," he said quietly, his own breathing not quite steady. "You're safe." She nodded, unable to speak just yet. He was soaked through, his shirt clinging, water dripping from his hair. He'd come into the water fully clothed. No hesitation. The moment he'd seen her fall, the knowledge of it that someone would act so immediately for her safety made her chest tight with emotion. Ashki looked around, spotted the blanket she'd brought to sit on while the clothes dried. He fetched it, shook it out, and wrapped it around her shoulders, turning his back while she adjusted it to cover her soaked dress. The gesture was so typically him, protective but respectful, maintaining boundaries even in crisis. "Thank you," she managed, voice hoarse from coughing. He glanced back, assured himself she was decent, then began gathering the scattered clothes that hadn't been swept away. "Creek's running high," he said, his tone conversational, as if she hadn't just nearly drowned. "Should have warned you. Spring melt makes it dangerous." "I thought I was careful." "Careful's good, but water doesn't care about careful." He wrung out a shirt. Movements efficient. "Like people sometimes Coal. Forces that just take. It was more philosophy than he usually offered. Elena pulled the blanket tighter, watching him work. His hands were steady now, but she'd felt them tremble when he first pulled her out. He'd been frightened too, she realized, frightened for her. When I was under, she said slowly, I thought about dying, not with fear, but with anger, that I'd only just started living again. He paused in his work, looking at her fully. Good, he said. Anger means you want to live. Better than accepting. They worked together to salvage what they could, spreading clothes on bushes to dry. The sun climbed higher, warming Elena through the blanket. Her hair began to dry in wild curls she usually kept tightly bound. She caught Ashki glancing at it, something unreadable in his expression. I must look a sight, she said, attempting to finger-comb the tangles. You look alive, he countered. That's all that matters. But there was something in how he said it, a roughness to his usually even tone. Their eyes met and held for a moment longer than necessary. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. This was dangerous territory, more dangerous than the creek, in its way. Ashki seemed to recognize it too. He stepped back, putting proper distance between them again. We should head back, he said. You need dry clothes and warm food. They made their way back to the homestead, Elena wearing the blanket like a shawl over her wet things. Ashki walked ahead, giving her privacy, but she noticed how he kept glancing back to ensure she was following safely. At the cabin, he built up the fire while she retreated to her corner to change. Her hands shook as she peeled off the wet clothes, and not entirely from cold. Something had shifted by the creek, not in action, but in awareness. The careful distance they'd maintained all winter suddenly felt less like respect, and more like restraint. When she emerged in dry clothes, hair braided back to proper neatness, Ashki had hot coffee waiting. They sat at the table, the familiar ritual of shared silence settling around them. But the silence felt different now, charged with unspoken possibilities. The Delgados sent word yesterday, he said finally. Cole's been making more noise, talking about coming out here with men to retrieve his property. Elena's stomach clenched. For a moment, by the creek, she'd forgotten about Cole, about the threat hanging over their peaceful life. When? Soon, maybe. EPH Lyle's been asking about the trails out here. Jose Delgado thinks within the week. I won't go back. The words came out fiercer than she intended. I'll die first. No dying, Ashki said firmly. Not you, not for him. We handle this different. How? He was quiet for a moment, thinking. In my people's way, when someone saves another from water, there's a bond, responsibility. I pulled you from the creek, so your life is partly my concern now. Elena frowned. You already saved me. In town, you don't owe. Not about owing, he interrupted. About choosing. I choose to stand between you and harm. You choose to stay and face it. Together. We're stronger than apart. The simplicity of it, the matter-of-fact declaration of partnership, made her throat tight. Together, she agreed softly. Over the next few days, they prepared. Ashki reinforced the cabin's defenses, taught Elena to load and shoot his spare rifle. She was a poor shot, but, as he said, sometimes the sound mattered more than accuracy. They established signals, plans for different scenarios, ways to alert the Delgados if needed. But there were other changes too. Small things. The way Ashki's hand lingered when showing her how to hold the rifle, how Elena found excuses to work near him. Their comfortable silence now threaded with awareness. Neither acted on it. The situation was too precarious, the future too uncertain, but it hummed between them like a plucked string. 3 nights later, Elena woke to the sound of horses. Many horses moving without hurry, confident in their numbers. She slipped from her cot, reaching for the rifle as Ashki had taught her. He emerged from his room fully dressed, weapons ready. How many, she whispered. 6, maybe 7. His voice was calm. Stay inside. Watch the back window. But Elena moved to stand beside him at the front window instead. Together, remember. A slight smile touched his mouth. Stubborn woman. I learned from watching you. The riders came into view in the moonlight. Cole led them, swaying in his saddle but upright enough. EPH Lyle rode beside him, professional and alert. The others were town men, some she recognized, others strangers. All armed. Yazzie! Cole's voice boomed across the yard. Send out my daughter, and we'll leave peaceful like. Ashki opened the door, stepping onto the porch with rifle visible but not raised. Elena stayed just inside, where she could be seen but not easily grabbed. The woman is here by choice, Ashki said evenly. She's free to go if she wishes. I don't wish it, Elena called out, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. I'm not his daughter and never was. He has no claim on me. Cole's face twisted with rage. Lying witch, tell them how you pretended all those years. Tell them how you made a fool of me. You made a fool of yourself, Elena shot back. With drink and violence and small-mindedness, I survived you the only way I could. Enough talk. EPH Lyle cut in. There's law to consider. The girl's of age and unmarried. Her legal guardian has rights. He sold those rights. Ashki interrupted. I have witnesses. Money changed hands in public. It's done. Selling white women to Indians ain't legal, one of the other men called out. Don't matter what money changed hands. This was the crux of it. Elena knew, not law but prejudice, not concern for her welfare but offense at the racial boundary crossed. She stepped out onto the porch, moving to stand beside Ashki. Then arrest Cole for trying to sell me, she said clearly. If the transaction was illegal, he's the criminal. I'm just a woman who found work and shelter with a decent man who pays fair wages and respects boundaries. Nothing illegal in that. The logic of it caused a stir among the riders. She saw uncertainty in some faces, the beginning of doubt about this midnight ride's righteousness. She's bewitched, Cole snarled. The Indian's done something to her mind. My mind is clearer than it's ever been, Elena said. Clear enough to see you for what you are, a pathetic drunk who beats those weaker than himself and calls it manhood. Cole went for his gun then, rage overcoming what little sense he had left. But he was drunk and slow, and Ashki's rifle was already moving, not to shoot to knock the weapon from Cole's hand with the barrel. The gun went flying, and Cole tumbled from his horse with a cry. Enough! EPH Lyle's voice cracked like a whip. He had his own weapon out, but not aimed. A lawman trying to regain control. Everyone calm down. Ashki kept his rifle ready but lowered. Take him and go, he said quietly. No blood needs spilling tonight. You really want to stay here, girl? Lyle asked Elena directly. Say it clear, so there's no mistake. Elena thought of the creek, of strong hands pulling her to safety, of patient silences and slowly blooming trust, of the self she'd discovered in this place of red rock and endless sky. I want to stay, she said firmly. This is my home, my choice. And if Cole or anyone else tries to force different, they'll find I'm not the scared girl who stayed silent all those years. I have a voice now, and friends, and the law on my side if it comes to that. Lyle studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You heard her, boys? Nothing to do here but head home. This ain't over, Cole slurred from the ground. You'll shut your mouth and get on your horse. Lyle cut him off. Or I'll arrest you for drunk and disorderly, attempted assault, and whatever else I can think of. The girls made her choice clear. It's done. It took some doing to get Cole back on his horse, but eventually the group rode away, their torches fading into the distance. Ashki and Elena stood on the porch watching until they were completely gone. You spoke well, Ashki said finally. I was terrified, Elena admitted. Courage isn't absence of fear, It's acting despite it. He turned to look at her in the moonlight. You have courage, Elena, more than you know. She felt the pull between them, stronger than the creek's current. It would be so easy to step closer, to let the night's emotion carry them somewhere new. But Ashki stepped back, maintaining the boundary that kept things clear between them. Get some rest, he said gently. Tomorrow we visit the Delgados. Make sure they witness this. Build a record of truth against future lies. Elena nodded, understanding. Whatever was growing between them needed solid ground, not the shaky foundation of crisis and dependence. They had time now. Cole's claim was broken, witnessed by men who mattered. She was free to choose her path. As she lay in her cot that night, she thought about water and rescue and the different kinds of drowning. Cole had tried to drown her in silence and fear, but Ashki had pulled her up into air and light and possibility, not just from the creek, but from the life that had trapped her. Her wet hair tangled with his rough hands. Such a simple moment, but it held everything: danger and safety, fear and trust, the potential for something deeper than either had expected to find in this harsh land. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she was warm and dry and free. Together, she whispered to the darkness, and the word felt like a promise, not of romance necessarily, though that possibility hummed in the space between them, but of partnership, of facing the world as allies rather than alone. The spring creek would keep running high for weeks yet, carrying mountain snow to distant valleys. But Elena no longer feared its current. She had been lifted from the water by hands that knew how to hold without grasping, how to save without claiming. And in that lifting, she had found not just safety, but the beginning of something that might, with patience and time, grow as strong and enduring as the red rocks themselves. The drought came without warning that summer, turning the usually reliable creek to a trickle and the grass to brittle brown. Elena watched from the cabin porch as Ashki studied the cloudless sky, his expression grave. They had been through so much since Cole's midnight visit, building trust, establishing routine, learning to be partners in this harsh land. Now, nature itself seemed determined to test them. How bad? She asked, joining him at the corral where the horses stood listlessly in what little shade the lean-to provided. Bad enough, he replied. Maybe worse than the year they sent us walking. The long walk. He rarely mentioned it directly, but Elena had learned to recognize the shadow it cast across his memories. She'd pieced together fragments: forced removal, hundreds of miles on foot, death and suffering beyond measure. That he compared this drought to those times told her everything about their situation. What do we do? Move the horses to Skeleton Canyon. There's a spring there that runs deeper. Then pray for rain and ration what we have. He turned to her, something soft in his eyes. You could go to the Delgados. They have a well, supplies. We've discussed this. Elena cut him off. Where you go, I go. That's what partners do. A slight smile touched his mouth. They'd grown easier with each other these past months, the careful distance evolving into something warmer, though still respectful. Stubborn woman. You wouldn't have me any other way. True enough. They spent the next days moving the horses in small groups to the canyon, a journey that should have taken hours, stretching to a full day in the heat. Elena learned to travel in the early morning and late evening, to find shade during the brutal midday sun, to conserve water with religious dedication. It was during one of these trips that she first saw the smoke. Fire, Ashki said quietly, studying the dark column rising from the direction of their homestead. Started near Redwash from the look of it. Elena's stomach clenched. In drought conditions, fire was every homesteader's nightmare. The cabin, wind's pushing it north for now, but that can change. He clicked to the horses, urging them to a faster pace despite the heat. We need to cut a fire break. Move what we can. They rode hard, reaching the homestead as the smoke thickened on the horizon. Without discussion, they fell into urgent action. Ashki began cutting brush and grass around the cabin, creating a barrier of bare earth. Elena hauled water from their dwindling supply to wet down the walls and roof. The Delgados. She gasped between buckets. Should we warn them? Already on their way, I'd guess. Jose knows fire. Sure enough, as the sun began to set, 3 riders appeared: Jose Delgado and his 2 eldest sons, all carrying tools and determination. Senor Ashki, Jose called. We saw the smoke. How can we help? They worked through the night, cutting and clearing and watching the orange glow creep closer across the ridge. The wind held steady northward, but they all knew how quickly that could change. By dawn, they had a defensible space around the homestead, but exhaustion weighed on everyone. You should sleep, Ashki told Elena as she swayed on her feet. Just for an hour. You first, she countered, but her body betrayed her, trembling with fatigue. He caught her arm as she stumbled. Elena, rest, I'll watch. She wanted to argue, but couldn't find the strength. The Delgado boys had bedded down near the corral, their father keeping watch with Ashki. She made it to her cot and was asleep before her head touched the pillow. She woke to shouting and the acrid smell of smoke, stumbling outside. She found chaos. The wind had shifted, driving the fire directly toward them. Already, spot fires dotted the hillside where embers had blown ahead of the main blaze. The horses! Ashki was already moving, releasing the corral gate. Drive them to the canyon, Jose. Take your boys and go. We don't leave friends, the older man said firmly. Miguel, Carlos, help with the horses. I'll stay with the fire break. Elena grabbed a blanket, soaking it in their precious water before running to beat out spot fires. The heat was incredible, sucking air from her lungs, making her eyes stream. She lost track of time, focused only on the next flame, the next ember, the next threat. Then Ashki was beside her, pulling her back. Main fire's too close. We need to pull back to the creek bed. The cabin is wood and mud. We're flesh and blood. Come on. They retreated with the Delgados to the nearly dry creek, using the cut bank as shelter from the worst of the heat. Elena pressed against the cool earth, Ashki's body shielding her from flying embers. She could hear him murmuring something prayers in Navajo. She thought, though she didn't understand the words. The fire roared over them like a living thing, consuming everything in its path. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, certain this was the end, but then, miraculously, it was past, racing on toward the north, leaving smoking devastation behind. They emerged slowly, coughing, surveying the damage. The cabin still stood scorched but intact, saved by their firebreak. The corral was gone, the garden destroyed, but the core of their home remained. Dios mío, Jose breathed. You were lucky. Lucky and prepared, Ashki corrected. He looked at Elena, face streaked with soot and sweat. You did well, she laughed, surprising herself. I was terrified the entire time. But you stayed. You fought. His hand found hers, squeezing briefly before propriety reasserted itself. That's what matters. The Delgados helped them assess the damage and plan for recovery. The well had survived, though water remained critically low. They'd lost supplies, fencing, months of work, but they were alive. And in this harsh land, that was victory enough. You'll stay with us, Jose declared, until you can rebuild. Ashki shook his head. Appreciate it, but we'll manage. This is our home. Jose looked between them, something knowing in his expression. See, I see that. But you'll take supplies at least, and dinner with us tomorrow. My Maria insists. After the Delgados left, Ashki and Elena stood in the ruins of their garden. Everything they'd planted, all their careful tending, reduced to ash. We'll replant, Elena said firmly, when the rains come. If they come. When, she insisted, This land has survived worse than one bad season. So have you. So have I." He turned to her then, really looked at her. "That day in town, I thought I was saving a scared girl, but you were never that. Were you just waiting for the right moment to show your strength? You gave me that moment, the space to find it." She met his gaze steadily. "I won't forget that." Something passed between them, deeper than gratitude, stronger than the partnership they'd built. But before either could act on it, a sound made them turn thunder, distant but unmistakable. They watched the horizon where dark clouds were building, hardly daring to hope. The thunder came again, closer, and with it the smell that every desert dweller knew rain on distant earth. "Maybe," Ashki said softly. "Definitely," Elena countered, and was rewarded with one of his rare, full smiles. The rain didn't come that day, or the next, but it was building, and that was enough to sustain hope. They worked to salvage what they could, accepting help from the Delgados while maintaining their independence. Elena learned to patch walls with mud and straw, to stretch their meager supplies, to find edible plants that survived the fire. One evening, as they sat outside the scorched cabin eating a simple meal, Ashki broke a long silence. "My grandmother used to say fire clears the way for new growth, burns out the old to make room for something better. Do you believe that?" "I believe in cycles, death and rebirth, loss and finding." He paused. "I lost everything in the long walk, family, land, the life I knew. Thought I'd never trust again, never let anyone close enough to lose." Elena waited, sensing the importance of this moment. "Then you came," he continued, "silent and fierce and stubborn as any warrior. Made me remember that closing off from pain also closes off from joy." "Ashki," she began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish. Been working up to this for months." He took a breath. "Don't know what's coming. Coal might return. Drought might break us. 100 other things could go wrong. But I know I want to face it with you, not as employer and worker, as more." Elena's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to court you proper, if you'll have me. Take time. Do it right. You deserve that after everything taken from you by force." The offer, respectful, patient, honorable, broke something open in her chest. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes." He smiled then, shy as a boy despite his years. "Good. That's good." They sat quietly after that, hands not quite touching on the rough wooden bench, watching lightning flicker on the horizon. The drought hadn't broken. The challenges ahead remained daunting, but something had shifted between them. A decision made, a path chosen together. That night, the wind brought the definite scent of rain, still distant but coming. Elena lay on her cot, soon to be moved to the Delgados, while they rebuilt properly and thought about fire and renewal. Cole's shadow still lingered at the edges of her mind, the threat of his return real, but it no longer defined her world. She had chosen to stay and fight for this life, chosen to trust again despite the risks, chosen to let someone see her not as the silent ghost she'd been, but as the woman she was becoming. The fire had tested them, revealed them, and they had not been found wanting. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, with the promise of rain in the air and the promise of something deeper taking root between her and Ashki, Elena felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She had been dragged to Willow Creek's market square as property, had left it in silence and fear. Now she was choosing her own path, with a man who understood that the greatest strength sometimes lay in gentleness, the deepest courage in patience. The rains would come, the land would heal, and on the cleared ground of what had been, something new would grow carefully tended, respectfully nurtured, strong enough to withstand whatever storms might follow. The rains finally came 3 weeks after the fire, transforming the scorched earth into mud and the dry arroyos into rushing streams. Elena stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching Ashki work to channel the water away from their newly repaired walls. They had spent those weeks rebuilding not just structures, but the careful foundation of their changing relationship. True to his word, Ashki had courted her with old-fashioned propriety. Small gestures, a wildflower left on her work table, his best shirt worn to Sunday dinner at the Delgados, teaching her to braid leather while maintaining careful distance. It was nothing like the rough possession Cole had shown her mother's replacement, nothing like the ownership men usually claimed. It was partnership deepening into something more tender. "Elena?" Maria Delgado's voice carried across the yard. The older woman approached on horseback, her son Miguel beside her. "We bring news from town." Elena's stomach tightened. News from Willow Creek rarely meant anything good. She met them at the gate Ashki had recently repaired, accepting the basket Maria handed down. "What kind of news?" Ashki asked, joining them, mud streaking his clothes. Miguel's face was grave. "Cole Bennett has hired more men, not from town strangers, hard men. They say he's coming to reclaim his property once and for all." "When?" Elena's voice came out steady, despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Soon, maybe days." Maria reached down to squeeze Elena's hand. "You could come to us, Mia, both of you. We have many cousins, many guns." "No," Elena interrupted gently. "Thank you, but no. Running makes me pray. I won't be that anymore." Ashki nodded slowly. "She's right. This needs to end." They spent that evening in council, planning for various scenarios. Jose Delgado arrived with his older brother's family, the network of support that had grown around them these past months. Plans were made, watchers set, preparations begun. But that night, as Elena lay sleepless on her cot, she made a different decision. She rose silently, penning a quick note, then slipped out into the pre-dawn darkness. She wouldn't let others fight her battles anymore. This was between her and Cole. She took Ashki's gentlest mare, the one that knew the trails to town, and rode through the cool morning. The journey that had seemed endless that first day now passed quickly, her body accustomed to the saddle, her mind clear with purpose. Willow Creek looked smaller than she remembered, meaner. She tied the mare behind the general store and walked down Main Street with her head high. No longer the ghost girl who'd hidden in shadows. People stared, some with recognition, others with curiosity. Elena ignored them all. Heading for the saloon where Cole spent his days, she found him at his usual table, already deep in a bottle despite the early hour. He looked up blearily as her shadow fell across his cards, then scrambled backward so fast his chair tipped. "You," he breathed. "Me," Elena agreed. "We need to talk." "You got nothing to say I want to hear, girl." "Then you'll listen anyway." She pulled out a chair and sat, keeping her hands visible and still. The saloon had gone silent, all eyes on them. Good. She wanted witnesses. "I know what you're planning," she said clearly. "Coming after me with hired guns. It needs to stop." Cole's face reddened. "You're my property." "I am no one's property." Elena cut him off, voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I was a child you terrorized into silence. A girl you beat for speaking, for crying, for breathing too loud. You made my life a misery for 7 years, and I survived by becoming nothing. But I'm not nothing anymore." "Ungrateful witch," he snarled. "I fed you, housed you. You hurt me." The simple words fell like stones. "Every day, in every way you could think of, and everyone here knew it. Saw the bruises, heard the stories, did nothing." She looked around the room, meeting eyes that quickly turned away. "All of you knew, and you let it happen." "Now see here," someone started, but Elena wasn't finished. "I'm not asking for justice. Too late for that. I'm offering a deal." She pulled out a leather pouch, heavy with coins. $500. Everything I've saved working for Mr. Yazzie. Take it and leave. Go to California. Mexico, anywhere but here. Start over where people don't know what kind of man you are. Cole stared at the money, greed warring with pride on his ravaged face. That's my money anyway, for raising you. For hurting me, but I'll pay it to be free of you forever. She leaned forward. This is mercy. Cole, more than you ever showed me. Take it and go, or stay and face what's coming. What's coming? He tried for threatening, but fear crept into his voice. The Delgados have filed papers about the illegal sale. Sheriff Watson in Cedar Ridge is interested in selling women, even stepdaughters. Isn't looked on kindly. The Indian agent has questions about threats against Navajo property, and Mr. Yazzie. She smiled coldly. He's a patient man, but his patience has limits, especially regarding people he cares about. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Cole's eyes darted around, finding no support in the watching faces. His hired guns hadn't arrived yet, and suddenly he looked like what he was, a raging drunk whose cruelty had finally caught up with him. You turned into quite the speaker, he said bitterly. All those years pretending to be mute. All those years surviving you. Elena stood, leaving the money on the table. Choose, Cole. Take the money and run, or stay and face consequences. Either way, I'm done being afraid of you. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. What about family loyalty? I'm the only kin you got left. Elena looked back one last time. You were never my family. Family doesn't do what you did. Family protects. Like the Delgados. Like Ashki. They showed me what family really means. She walked out then, through the silent saloon and into the morning light. Her hands shook as she untied the mare, but her heart felt light. She'd faced down her demon and found him smaller than her nightmares. The ride back seemed shorter still, her mind processing what she'd done. As she crested the final ridge, she saw riders approaching fast, Ashki in the lead. Jose and Miguel flanking him. They pulled up hard when they saw her. Ashki's face a mix of relief and anger. You left, he said flatly. Alone, to town. I left a note. A note. He dismounted, hands clenched. Elena, he could have... But he didn't. She slid from the mare, meeting his eyes. I needed to face him, to speak the words I couldn't for so long, to take back what he stole. And if he'd had his men there, if he'd hurt you, then I'd have faced that too. But I couldn't let you fight my battles anymore. Couldn't be the rescued girl forever. She touched his arm gently. I had to choose to save myself. The anger drained from his face, replaced by something deeper. Stubborn woman, he murmured. What did you say to him? She told them about the offer, the threats, the choice she'd given. Jose whistled low. $500, that's everything you saved. Worth it for freedom. Elena said simply. Think he'll take it? Miguel asked. He'd be a fool not to. Ashki said, question is whether his pride or greed wins. They had their answer 2 days later when Tom Rodriguez rode out with news. Cole Bennett had taken the money and caught the morning stage, heading west with only a bag and a bottle. The hired guns had arrived to find their employer gone, their payment with him. They'd caused some damage to the saloon in their displeasure, but moved on quickly enough. It's over, Tom said, accepting the water Elena offered. He's gone for good, I'd say. That much money will take him far, and he's burned every bridge here. After he left, Elena and Ashki stood in their rebuilt garden, looking at the green shoots pushing through the ash-enriched soil. The rains had continued, filling the creek, healing the land. Now her past was cleared away too, leaving room for new growth. You gave up everything you saved, Ashki said quietly. Not everything. She looked at him meaningfully. Just money. I kept what matters. He studied her for a long moment. Marry me. The words hung between them like sunrise. Elena's breath caught. What? Marry me, he repeated, taking her hands. Not because you need protection or I need help, Because I want to wake every morning knowing you're there by choice. Because you make me remember joy is possible. Because I love you, have loved you since you stood in my cabin that first night. Silent and fierce and unbroken despite everything. Ashki. Tears blurred her vision. I know it's not the proposal you might have dreamed. No fancy words or grand gestures. But it's true, and it's yours if you want it.
Yes,
she whispered, then louder.
Yes, of course, yes.
He kissed her then, first time despite months of courtship. And it was worth the wait. Gentle and sure, promising patience and partnership, and all the time they needed to build something lasting. When they told the Delgados, Maria wept with joy and immediately began planning a proper wedding, she declared, with music and food and everyone celebrating. You deserve that, mija. And so it was. 6 weeks later, in the chapel at Cedar Ridge with Father Martinez presiding, Elena married Ashki Yazi. She wore a dress Maria and her daughters had sewn, blue as the desert sky. He wore his best shirt and silver that had been his grandfather's. The Delgados filled the church, along with neighbors who'd become friends. Tom Rodriguez, even Sheriff Watson, who'd helped make the paperwork official. Jim Crawford came from Willow Creek, hat in hand. Should have done more, he said simply. Back then, knew it wasn't right. I'm sorry. It's done, Elena told him. We go forward from here. The reception was at the Delgado Ranch, tables groaning with food, guitars playing, children running between the dancers. Elena watched Ashki talking with Jose's brother about horses, saw how accepted he was here among these good people who judged by character rather than blood. Happy, Maria asked, joining her. More than I knew was possible, Elena admitted. Good. You both deserve it after everything. The older woman squeezed her hand. You found your voice, mija. Now use it to build a life worth having. As the sun set, Ashki found her on the porch. Ready to go home, Mrs. Yazi. Home, their cabin in the valley, rebuilt stronger than before, their horses in the corral, their garden growing green, their life together stretching ahead like an open trail. Ready? She said, taking his offered hand. They rode back in comfortable silence, the moon lighting their way. At the cabin, he helped her down, holding her close for a moment before stepping back. No more careful distance, she teased. No more distance, he agreed, though always careful, always respectful. You've been hurt enough by rough handling. You could never hurt me, Elena said with certainty. You showed me how to heal instead. Later, in the quiet of their room with moonlight painting silver squares on the floor, Elena thought about the journey that had brought her here, from silence to speech, from property to personhood, from fear to love. The girl who'd been sold in Willow Creek Square would hardly recognize the woman she'd become. What are you thinking? Ashki asked softly. About choices, she said. How that day in town, you gave me the first real choice I'd had in years, and every choice since has led here. Good choices, then. The best, she agreed, curling closer to his warmth. Outside, a wolf called in the distance, not threatening now, but simply part of the night's symphony. The creek gurgled with snowmelt and rain. The horses shifted peacefully in the corral. All was well in their small corner of the world, hard-won and carefully tended. Elena had found her voice, and with it, her life, and in this place of red rock and wide sky, with this man who'd shown her tenderness could be strength. She would use both to build something beautiful, something chosen, something free. The dust cloud on the horizon announced their arrival long before the riders came into view. Elena stood at the window, her hand finding the rifle propped beside the door. 6 months of marriage had brought peace, but old habits died hard. She watched the approaching group with narrowed eyes, counting horses, assessing threat levels the way Ashki had taught her. How many? His voice came from behind her. calm but alert. 4 riders, moving fast but not hiding it. She stepped aside as he joined her at the window. That's EPH Lyle's gray in front. Ashki's expression darkened. The hired gun hadn't been seen since that night he'd backed Cole's play. His return couldn't mean anything good. Get the Delgado's signal fire ready, just in case. Elena moved to comply, though something in the riders' formation seemed off. They weren't spreading out the way men did when planning an attack. They rode bunched, like they were escorting someone, or chasing someone. The truth became clear as they thundered into the yard. EPH Lyle led them, but his attention was on the 2 men flanked by his companions, strangers wearing the kind of clothes that marked them as trouble. One had blood on his shirt. Yazzie, Lyle called out. Need to talk. Official business. Ashki stepped onto the porch, rifle visible but not threatening. Elena stayed in the doorway where she could be seen, but not easily reached. They'd practiced this formation too many times to break it now. State your business, Lyle. The gunman dismounted, keeping his hands visible. Got a proposition. These 2 gentlemen have been causing trouble in the territory. Robbed the stage last week. Shot the guard. Been tracking them for the bounty. Nothing to do with us, Ashki said flatly. Hear me out. Lyle gestured to his prisoners. Trail led here. They were heading for your canyon, the one with the good water. Planning to hole up. Maybe take what supplies they needed. Elena saw Ashki stiffen. That canyon sheltered half their horse herd. And I could use a tracker. Someone who knows these trails better than any white man. Lyle's smile was humorless. Willing to split the bounty. $500. Legal-like, with papers and everything. Not interested. Even if I mentioned they've been asking about the Indian who lives with a white woman. Even if they seemed real interested in whether said woman might be alone sometimes. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Elena's hands clenched, but she kept her voice steady. You bring trouble to our door and call it opportunity. Lyle shrugged. I bring a chance to remove trouble permanently, with profit. He looked at Ashki. No, you don't like me. No, you got cause, but I'm not Cole Bennett. I'm a practical man. These 2 are worth more to me alive in Cedar Ridge than dead here. Help me get them there safe. We both profit. And if we refuse, Ashki asked, then I take them myself. Probably lose them in these canyons, I don't know. They probably circle back, angry and desperate. Lyle spread his hands. Your choice. Elena watched her husband calculate. She knew him well enough now to read the subtle shifts, the way his weight moved to his back foot when thinking. The slight narrowing of his eyes when seeing angles others missed. I'll guide you, Elena said suddenly. Both men turned to stare. I know the trails. I can track. Elena, Ashki started. It makes sense. She interrupted. You stay here. Protect the homestead. I guide them out. Collect our share. Everyone wins. She met Lyle's surprised gaze. Unless you object to taking orders from a woman. The gunman studied her for a long moment. The quiet girl who wasn't quiet. You've grown bold. I've grown practical, like you. Elena, no. Ashki's voice was firm. Too dangerous. Everything's dangerous, she countered. But this puts us in control. We choose the route, the pace, the camps. Better than letting them wander our territory alone. She could see him wavering, hating the risk but recognizing the logic. Finally, he turned to Lyle. Both of us guide. You follow our lead completely. Try anything. You'll kill me, Lyle finished. Understood. When do we leave? Dawn. Ashki decided. You camp by the creek tonight, under watch. As Lyle's group made camp, Ashki pulled Elena inside. This is foolish. This is smart, she corrected. He's right, those men are a threat whether we help or not. At least this way we control the situation. And $500 replaces what I gave Cole. Money's not worth your safety. She touched his face gently.
Nothing will happen. We'll be careful. Like always. Trust me.
He caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek. With my life. Doesn't mean I like this. They spent the evening preparing checking weapons, packing supplies, planning routes. Miguel Delgado rode over after spotting the campfire, and they arranged signals in case of trouble. The young man offered to ride along, but Ashki refused. Your family's done enough. This is our task. That night, Elena lay awake listening to Ashki's breathing and the distant sounds of Lyle's camp. She thought about the girl who'd cowered in silence for 7 years, who'd been sold like livestock in the town square. That girl never could have imagined volunteering to guide armed men through dangerous territory. But that girl hadn't known her own strength yet. Dawn came gray and cool, mist rising from the creek. Lyle's prisoners, introduced as Shaw and Brennan, looked rough after a night tied to wagon wheels. They eyed Elena with speculation that made her skin crawl, but she kept her expression neutral as she checked their bonds. "The woman's really coming?" Shaw asked Lyle. "Might be useful to have—" Ashki's knife appeared at the man's throat before he could finish. "Complete that thought and travel gets uncomfortable," he said quietly. "Easy," Lyle intervened. "They're merchandise. Damaged goods bring lower prices." Ashki stepped back but kept the knife visible. "Remember that," he told the prisoners. "You're worth money alive. Dead. You're just coyote food. Choose wisely." They set out as the sun crested the eastern ridges, Eloise leading on her steady mare, Ashki flanking the group where he could watch everyone. She chose trails that kept them in the open when possible, avoiding bucks canyons and blind corners where ambush would be easy. By midday, they'd covered good ground. Elena called a halt at a spring she and Ashki used when moving horses, while the men watered their mounts. She studied the horizon. Dust devils danced in the distance, but the sky stayed clear. "You know this country well," Lyle observed, joining her on the rocks above camp. "It's my home," she said simply. "Must have been hard, adjusting, town girl learning frontier ways." Elena almost laughed, as if Willow Creek had been civilization. "Easier than the life I left. Cole used to brag about you, his silent daughter who did all the work." Lyle's tone was carefully neutral. "Never seemed right, but wasn't my business." "No," Elena agreed. "It wasn't. Is now, though, in a way." He gestured to the prisoners below. "Men like that, they're predictable. Take what they want, hurt who they please. Not so different from Cole. Really, Cole's gone. But men like him keep coming. Always will." Lyle shifted, hand casual near his gun. "Might be good to have friends who can handle such men." Elena understood the offer alliance with a hired gun. Protection for a price. A year ago, she might have been tempted. Now, we have friends, good ones, don't need the kind that come with conditions. Lyle chuckled. "Fair enough. Can't blame a man for trying." They pushed on through the afternoon heat, Elena navigating the maze of canyons with growing confidence. She'd learned these trails bringing horses to water, fleeing grass fires, searching for strays. Each red rock formation had become a landmark, each hidden spring a secret shared between her and the land. Camp that night was in a defensible spot. Ashki chose high ground with clear sight lines and only one approach. Elena helped secure the prisoners while Ashki and Lyle arranged watches. Shaw kept making comments under his breath, ugly words about Indians and their white women, but Brennan had gone quiet, studying their captors with calculating eyes. "Smart route today," he finally said as Elena checked his bonds. "Avoided all the obvious ambush spots." She said nothing, continuing her task. "You're not what I expected," he continued. "Cole Bennett's mute daughter. They said, sold to an Indian. They said, made it sound like you were some kind of victim."
"I was,"
Elena said quietly.
"Then I chose not to be."
Something in her tone made him look closer. "You're the one Cole was really afraid of, aren't you?" Not your husband. You—"
"Cole's gone," was all she said, moving away.
The second day brought complications. A group of riders appeared on a distant ridge, paralleling their course. Apache raiders. Ashki identified, probably curious about the strange group moving through traditional hunting grounds. Everyone tensed, but the Apaches merely observed before melting back into the landscape. Could have been bad, Lyle admitted after they'd gone. "They know me," Ashki said simply. "No, I don't bring trouble to their lands." By evening, they reached the main trail to Cedar Ridge. Lyle's relief was visible. He was back in country he knew. They made final camp at a stageway station, the proprietor eyeing the mixed group with curiosity but asking no questions. "We'll make town by noon tomorrow," Lyle announced. "Job's almost done."
That night, Elena couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong, some instinct prickling at her awareness. She found Ashki equally alert, watching the darkness beyond their fire. "What is it?" she whispered.
"Don't know. Maybe nothing."
But his hand stayed on his rifle.
The attack came at dawn. Not from the prisoners, they remained secured, but from riders thundering out of the morning mist. 5 men, firing as they came. Voices raised in rebel yells. Shaw and Brennan's gang, come to retrieve their leaders. Elena rolled behind a water trough as bullets splintered wood around her. She could hear Ashki returning fire, Lyle cursing as he found cover. The prisoners were yelling, trying to direct their rescuers, adding to the chaos.
"The woman!" someone shouted.
"Get the woman for leverage."
Fear and anger flooded Elena in equal measure. She was tired of being seen as the weak link, the leverage, the victim. The rifle felt steady in her hands as she sighted on the nearest rider. Her shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him from his horse. Not a kill shot, she wasn't ready for that weight, but effective. The attack faltered as the gang realized their opposition included a second shooter. Ashki moved like smoke, using cover to flank the attackers. Lyle, whatever his faults, proved his reputation with careful, devastating fire. Within minutes, 2 attackers were down, 2 fleeing, 1 surrendering with hands high. "Everyone whole," Lyle called when the gunfire stopped. "Here,"
Elena answered, standing slowly. Her hands shook now that the danger passed, but her voice stayed steady. Ashki materialized beside her, checking for injuries with gentle hands.
"You shot well." "I shot necessary," she corrected. "There's a difference."
The aftermath was messy wounded to tend, another prisoner to secure, explanations for the way station owner, but by full daylight, they were ready to continue to Cedar Ridge with their expanded capture. 7 men instead of 2, Lyle calculated. That's near 2,000 in bounties. Your share just grew considerable. In Cedar Ridge, Sheriff Watson greeted them with surprise that shifted to respect as Lyle explained their role. "The Yazzies tracked and guided," he said simply. "Couldn't have done it without them." Papers were signed, bounties confirmed. Prisoners locked away to await trial. Elena stood in the sheriff's office, accepting her share of the reward, and marveled at the strange turns life took, from voiceless property to armed guide, from victim to victor. "That was brave, what you did," Sheriff Watson told her. "Both the guiding and the shooting. Just practical." Elena echoed Lyle's earlier words.
"Protecting what's mine."
Outside, Ashki waited with their horses. Lyle stood nearby, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Finally, he approached. "About that night with Cole," he started. "I did my job, but it wasn't right. Man shouldn't sell his daughter, Indian buyer or not." "No," Elena agreed. "He shouldn't. But you also listened when I spoke for myself. That matters." Lyle nodded, seeming to come to a decision. "I'm heading to California. Goldfields need men who can handle guns, and I'm tired of this territory. But if trouble comes calling again—" "We'll handle it," Ashki said firmly. "Like we always do." The ride home was quiet, both lost in thought. As their valley came into view, Elena felt the tension of the past days drain away. Home, safety, peace, earned and defended. "You were right," Ashki said suddenly. "Taking control was better than letting them wander loose. Still didn't like risking you." "I wasn't at risk," Elena replied. "I had you watching my back, just like you had me watching yours. That's what partners do." That evening, as they tended the horses and checked the garden, normal life reasserted itself. But Elena caught Ashki watching her with something new in his expression, not just love or protectiveness, but genuine pride. "What?" she asked finally. "Just thinking. 6 months ago, you gave everything you'd saved to buy peace from Cole. Today you earned it all back by facing down men just as bad." He smiled. "My wife, the warrior." Hardly that, but she stood a little straighter at his words. That night, counting their bounty money by lamplight, they made plans, improvements to the homestead, more horses, maybe a trip to Santa Fe to see the wider world. The future spread before them, full of possibility now that the past's shadows were finally banished. Elena thought about the journey from that day in Willow Creek to this moment. Every choice had led here to strength she'd never known she possessed, love she'd never thought to find, a life built on her own terms. Cole's cruelty had tried to break her into silence. Instead, it had forged her into someone who could face down outlaws and earn respect from hired guns. "No more trouble for a while, I hope," she said, banking the fire for the night. "Probably not," Ashki agreed. "Word spreads. The Yazzie place isn't an easy target anymore." Elena smiled at that. The Yazzie place, her place, defended with lead when necessary, but built with love, trust, and the daily choice to face the world together. Whatever came next, they would meet it as they had everything else side by side. Voices strong, hearts sure. The desert night settled around them, peaceful at last, and in their small cabin beneath the stars, two people who'd found each other across silence and sorrow slept deep, knowing they were exactly where they belonged. The morning sun painted the valley gold as Elena and Ashki worked side by side in their expanded garden. The bounty money had brought improvements: better fencing, a new well pump, glass windows for the cabin. But the greatest change was in how they moved together. No longer employer and worker, but true partners in every sense. "Maria sent word," Elena said, reading a note Miguel had delivered earlier. "She wants us for Sunday dinner. Says she has something important to discuss." Ashki straightened from tending the cornrows, wiping sweat from his brow. "Important usually means she's plotting something." Elena smiled. In the year since their wedding, Maria Delgado had become the mother she'd never truly had: warm, protective, and occasionally meddlesome in the best way. She mentioned something about the old Hernandez place, the homestead that burned last winter. "Good land," Ashki mused. "Borders ours to the south. Why would—" He stopped, understanding dawning. "She wants us to buy it." "The Hernandez family moved to California. Jose's been managing the land, but—" Elena trailed off, seeing the same possibility her husband did. More grazing for their growing horse herd, better access to water, room to expand. That Sunday, they rode to the Delgado Ranch to find half the valley gathered. The monthly community meal had grown from a simple family dinner to a social institution. Elena still marveled at being welcomed into this circle: Mexican settlers, a few Anglo ranchers who judged by character rather than blood, even some Apache traders who did business with Ashki. Mija Maria embraced Elena warmly, then held her at arm's length with knowing eyes. "You look well." "Very well. That glow of happiness suits you." "Marriage agrees with me," Elena said simply. Maria's expression suggested she suspected more, but she let it pass. "Come, we need to talk business." The Hernandez property was indeed for sale, and at a fair price, but Maria had bigger plans. "If you buy it, the Sandoval boys want to lease the eastern section for their cattle. The Romeros need grazing rights for their sheep. You could be the center of something bigger, a cooperative, sharing resources and protection. Elena exchanged glances with Ashki. They'd talked about this late at night when dreams felt safe to voice. Building not just a homestead, but a community. A place where different peoples could work together despite the divisions the outside world tried to enforce. "We'll think on it," Ashki said diplomatically. After the meal, as children played and adults talked, Sheriff Watson arrived from Cedar Ridge. His presence at these gatherings had become more common since the outlaw incident, representing law that worked with rather than against the local people. "Yazzie, Mrs. Yazzie," he greeted them. "Glad you're here. Got news might interest you." They moved to a quieter corner where Watson could speak freely. "Remember those outlaws you helped bring in? They talked plenty trying for lighter sentences. Mentioned they'd been hired for a specific job before they went freelance." Elena's stomach tightened. "What job?" "Seems Cole Bennett promised them good money to raid a certain homestead. Grab a certain woman. He never paid, of course, being gone. But they came looking anyway." The old fear tried to rise, but Elena pushed it down. Cole was gone. These men were in prison. The threat was past. Why tell us now? Because one of them had a letter from Bennett, posted from San Francisco 2 weeks before you faced those men. Watson pulled out a worn envelope. "Thought you should see it." Elena took the letter with steady hands, Ashki reading over her shoulder. Cole's scrawled writing was unmistakable. Asterisk. "The Indian stole what's mine. The girl belongs with her own kind. Get her back and there's $1,000 waiting. Make him sorry he interfered with a white man's business." "He was still trying to control me," Elena said quietly. "Even from California." "Was," Watson emphasized. The letter also mentioned he was sick, coughing blood. "Doubt he's troubling anyone now." He took the letter back. "Just thought you should know, case it helps you rest easier." That night, Elena stood outside their cabin looking at the stars. Ashki joined her, wrapping a blanket around both their shoulders against the cool air. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Knowing Cole might be dead." Elena considered. "Free," she said finally. "Not glad for his death, but free. He can't send any more men, can't poison any more minds against us. It's truly over. New beginnings." Then, Ashki's hand found hers. "The Hernandez land, Maria's cooperative idea, building something bigger than just our own safety." "Is that what you want?" "I want what makes you happy. This valley, these people, they've given us both something we'd lost. Family, purpose, home." He paused. "My grandfather used to say the strongest tree grows not alone, but in a grove, roots intertwined. Maybe it's time to grow those roots." The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A small wagon approached, driven by a young woman with a baby in her arms. Behind her huddled 2 children, wide-eyed and thin. Elena recognized the look, the wariness of those who'd known too much hardship. "Please," the woman said as they emerged to meet her. "I'm looking for the Yazzie place. They said in town. They said you might help." "This is the Yazzie place," Elena confirmed gently. "I'm Elena Yazzie. This is my husband. What do you need?" The story tumbled out. Sarah Morrison, widow, husband killed in a mining accident, evicted from company housing, traveling to relatives in Texas but robbed on the road, left with nothing. The children, ages 6 and 8, clung to their mother's skirts as she spoke. "I can work," Sarah said desperately. "Cook, clean, anything, just for a few days, until I figure out what to do." Elena looked at the children, remembering her own young fear, her own desperation. Without hesitation, she said, "Come inside. You're safe here." They settled the family in the small room Ashki had built for storage, now hastily converted to living space, over a hot meal the first in days. From the children's enthusiasm, Sarah's full story emerged. The mining company had refused compensation for her husband's death. The robbery had taken their traveling money. Relatives in Texas might not even take them in. "You'll stay as long as needed," Elena declared. Ashki nodded agreement. Over the following days, Sarah proved her worth 10 times over. She was educated, could read and write beautifully, knew figures. When she saw Elena struggling with the homestead's simple books, she offered to help. "You could teach me," Elena admitted, swallowing pride. "Properly. I learned some letters, but never had real schooling." Sarah's face lit up the first genuine smile they'd seen. "I was a teacher before I married. I'd be honored." And so their household grew. Sarah and her children became part of daily life. The woman's gentle presence, a balm Elena hadn't known she needed, under Sarah's tutelage. Elena's reading improved rapidly. In return, Elena taught Sarah the practical skills of frontier life gardening, preserving food, basic healing herbs the Delgado women had shown her. The children, Beth and James, blossomed away from the mining camp's soot and sorrow. They helped with chores, played with the Delgado grandchildren, learned Spanish words and Navajo phrases with equal enthusiasm. Watching them, Elena felt an ache she couldn't quite name. One evening, as Sarah settled her children for sleep, she found Elena on the porch. "You've given us more than shelter," she said quietly. "You've given us hope, family." "We've all made family here," Elena replied. "Chosen family. Sometimes that's stronger than blood." Sarah hesitated, then asked, "Do you and Ashki plan children of your own?" The question hung in the cooling air. Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her belly. "Perhaps," she said softly, "when the time is right." But she knew, had known for weeks now. The signs were clear to a woman who'd learned to read her own body for survival. She hadn't told Ashki yet, waiting for the right moment, the right words. Now, with their household full and their future expanding, perhaps it was time. She found him in the barn, checking a mare ready to foal. He looked up as she entered, smiling in the lamplight. "Sarah seems happier. The teaching helps her as much as you. She's good at it, patient, kind." Elena moved closer. "Like you've been with me, teaching me to trust again, to hope." "Elena," he set aside his tools, giving her full attention. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about the future, about the Hernandez land, about building something bigger here." She took his hands, placing them on her still flat stomach. "About the family we're creating." His eyes widened, understanding dawning. "You mean?" "Winter. I think maybe early spring." She watched joy transform his features. "Are you happy?" For answer, he pulled her close, holding her like she was made of spun glass and steel, combined precious but strong. "Happy doesn't touch it," he murmured against her hair. "Grateful, awed, terrified." "All appropriate responses," she laughed, tears pricking her eyes. They stood together in the barn's quiet, holding this new secret between them. Outside, night settled over their valley, their growing, thriving corner of the world. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The Hernandez land to negotiate, Sarah's future to secure, a child to prepare for, a community to build. But tonight, they had this, the culmination of every choice that had led from a dusty town square to this moment. Elena thought of the silent girl she'd been, sold like property, voiceless and trapped. That girl could never have imagined this joy, this fullness, this life built on her own terms with a partner who saw her as an equal. "We'll need to expand the cabin again," Ashki said practically, though his voice still held wonder. "And buy the Hernandez place for certain. A child needs room to grow." "Children," he corrected. "The Morrison children will be staying. Won't they? Sarah's too valuable to lose, and they're already family." Family. The word that had once meant fear and pain now meant warmth and possibility. Elena smiled,
feeling the future unfold before them like a sunrise bright, warming, full of promise. In the main cabin, they found Sarah reading to her children by firelight. She looked up as they entered, taking in their joined hands and glowing faces. Understanding lit her features. "Congratulations," she said simply. "This child will be born into so much love. All our children will be," Elena replied, including Beth and James in her gaze. They might not share blood, but they would share this home, this family, this life carved from wilderness and watered with hope. Later, as the household settled for sleep, Elena and Ashki sat by their fire planning quietly. The Hernandez land, the cooperative with their neighbors, the school Sarah could run for Valley children, the horse breeding program they dreamed of. All of it felt possible now, with their family growing and their community strong around them. "No more silence," Elena murmured, remembering only voices raised in joy. "And occasional argument," Ashki added with a smile. "Can't have a proper family without some spirited discussion." "True enough." She leaned against him, feeling their child's future heartbeat like a promise. "We've come far from that day in the square." "Only the beginning," he assured her. "Every choice led here, but here leads forward, to our children, their children, roots deep as the mountains." The fire crackled, warming their faces as night deepened around their cabin. In her room, Sarah sang softly to her children. In the barn, the mare shifted, new life stirring within her too. And in the shelter of Ashki's arms, Elena felt her own transformation complete from silence to song, from property to personhood, from survival to thriving life. Tomorrow, they would ride to see Jose Delgado about the land. They would plan and build and grow. But tonight, they simply held each other in the promise of all their tomorrows, knowing that every hard choice had been worth it for this home, this love. This family born of choice and courage rather than chance. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had witnessed her tears in Willow Creek, her fears on the trail, her first words after 7 years of silence. Now they witnessed her joy, complete and earned, as she started the next chapter of a story that had begun in sorrow but would end generations hence in triumph. "Thank you," she whispered. Not sure if she spoke to Ashki, to God, or to the girl she'd been who'd survived long enough to become who she was. "Always," Ashki replied, understanding as he always did. Always and forever, no matter what comes. And in their little cabin at the heart of a growing community, two people who had saved each other held tight to their present happiness and their future hope, ready for whatever dawn would bring. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Elena and Ashki's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Tales for more stories. Hit that like button, and don't forget to press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners. Your support means the world and helps these stories of courage and redemption find their audience.